All right, it looks like we've got most everybody here who's going to be here. We may have some trickle in here in the next minute or so. I'm going to go ahead and get going. Welcome everybody. My name is Luke Wortley. I'm one of the program coordinators here at the Upper Midwest Telehealth Resource Center, which is, if you are from the states of Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, or Ohio, your regional telehealth resource center as part of the National Consortium of Telehealth Resource Centers. Today, I'm going to be talking about informed consent and documentation requirements for telehealth. Some of this information is probably common knowledge, but I think it's important to know where all of your informed consent language is located in your administrative codes in your respective states. And some of this information may even be changing in the coming days. I know Indiana is going to drop their public state of emergency on July 1st if it's not renewed. And I know Michigan has just rescinded their public health emergency declaration status. So we'll see how much of this carries over into the post PHE world. So I'm going to start with Indiana. And most of that language can be found in Section 2, Title 16 of the Indiana Administrative Code, much of which actually has to do with HIV/AIDS screening. But the actual language around informed consent, as I've screenshotted right here, can be found there. But the thing that most of y'all probably came for is to talk about documentation when it comes to telehealth. According to Indiana Medicaid, documentation must be maintained at the distant site and originating site to substantiate any service provided. Documentation must indicate that services were rendered via telemedicine and must clearly identify the location of both distant and originating sites. And I will be able to provide, looks like we've got a chat coming in. Will we get, yes, the slides will be posted on the UMTRC website under our resources tab once we get the recording up and loaded. Thank you for the question. And I will go ahead and leave the rest of that for you all to read. It does actually mention here at the bottom, appropriate consent from the member must be obtained by the originating site and documentation maintained at both distant and originating sites. So according to Indiana Medicaid, this is probably the best documentation standard that I could find. So if you are in the state of Indiana, make sure that you're documenting use of telemedicine and the services provided at both the distant and originating sites if possible, and obtaining consent where possible as well. So in Illinois, this was a little bit harder to find, but during the height of the pandemic last year, I was able to find that as far as the public health emergency goes, the patient must at least verbally consent to receive any virtual check-in services, and that applies to telemedicine more broadly as well after I did some digging. So at the point of admission for services, any licensed organization must obtain written informed consent as defined in sections 1 to 10 in the administrative rule from the client, patient, or legal guardian. And I've got a link to that language right here that can be found in the Illinois Administrative Code. So normally you have to obtain written consent, but during the public health emergency, verbal consent is okay as long as it's documented by the originating and distant sites. So definition of informed consent, which is pretty similar to Indiana's, is any permission for a procedure freely granted by a person or persons authorized by law to give consent to services and treatment plans. The documentation standards for Illinois were a bit harder to find, but if you go to section 140 of the Illinois Administrative Code, I've got the links to both of these, sections 403, section 28, and both under Title 89. You can find the medical records documenting telehealth services must be maintained by the originating and distant sites, just like in Indiana. Shall include but are not limited to the following: and it lists all of the requirements here, including the medical necessity for the telehealth service. So those two links can be found right here in green once we get the slides posted. And I'll go ahead and pause there. We've gone through Illinois and Indiana respectively. Just want to make sure that everybody's here and with me. I don't see any chats. All right, we'll go ahead and move on to Michigan. And their administrative code, their language around consent required can be found in Chapter 333, Section 16-248. Except as otherwise provided in this section, a health professional shall not provide a telehealth service without directly or indirectly obtaining consent for treatment. This can be written or verbal. And this section does not apply to a health professional who is providing a telehealth service to an inmate who is under the jurisdiction of the Department of Corrections and is housed in a correctional facility. So that's a little bit different language than we've seen from Indiana and Illinois, a bit more concise, and also includes people who are currently in the criminal justice system. When it comes to documentation standards in Michigan, again, it's a little bit more succinct. Shall keep and maintain a record for each patient for whom he or she has provided medical services, including a full and complete record of tests and examinations performed, observations made, and treatments provided. That's pretty straightforward. And it even specifies that a licensee may destroy a record that is less than 7 years old only if both the following are satisfied, and it lists a few provisions for that. So there's a little bit of extra language in terms of how long you have to keep the records. But by far and away, the best sort of step-by-step way to document any kind of telehealth service or telehealth encounter can be found in the Michigan Medicaid Provider Manual, similar to Indiana Medicaid, how I lifted language from that. But this goes into quite a bit more detail on pages 51 to 56, and I've got that linked right here to a PDF of that file. So we'll go ahead and move on to Ohio. During the public health emergency, I'm not sure if Ohio has lifted their designation of the public health emergency or not yet. But as of right now, the language that's being used is providers must document their use of telemedicine and meet minimal standards of care. And if you want to know what the minimum standards of care are, many of those are actually probably best found under the language surrounding medical marijuana in section 4731, 3203 of the Ohio Administrative Code. That even gives you 10 stipulations to create and maintain a medical record that documents the provision of any medical service, not just any kind of medical marijuana, but any kind of medical service that are pursuant to the minimum standards of care that are found elsewhere in the administrative code. So similar to Illinois and Indiana, Ohio has language surrounding informed consent that sets forth the general terms and nature of the purpose of procedure and procedures, what procedures are expected to accomplish together with the reasonably known risks. They're just a little bit more formal and a little bit more in depth about it than some of the other states, but the language is all essentially the same. Apologies for pausing. We've got people entering the waiting room here. So documentation standards for Ohio. Chapter 5150, section 118 of the administrative code. I've got a screen grab of C1 and C2 here. That basically all services provided via telehealth shall be provided in accordance with all state and federal laws, including the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, or HIPAA. So basically, it just has to be part of their medical records, has to be kept at the distant and originating sites. That's all I could find for Ohio in terms of their administrative code. But again, I would refer you to the minimum standards of care in terms of creating a medical record. We have a chat. Does telehealth informed consent need to be done with each service or only one time per year? Okay, Peggy, as of right now, telehealth informed consent operates just like any other kind of in-person consent. So if you're providing services that normally would only need to be obtained, where informed consent would only need to be obtained yearly, then you can just do that. If you are ultra paranoid and ultra concerned, then obtaining consent with each service is also perfectly acceptable, as long as it's all documented at both the distant and originating site where possible. I hope that answers your question. Anybody else before I move on? Okay, in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and move on. Here's a little bit more language from another section of the Ohio Administrative Code for general records requirements. So the UMTRC during the public health emergency was giving out this sample informed consent for telehealth consultation form. It's a very succinct one-page form that you can gain whatever your chosen platform is. Literally just share the screen, go through each particular bullet point here, and then obtain consent that way. Obviously, you're more than welcome to share a PDF or image file with the patient's email address, get it signed and sent back for written consent. But during the public health emergency, verbal consent was considered fine by CMS. So since most states Medicaid programs just follow kind of what CMS standards are, we found that verbal consent was fine for our 4-state region as well. But like I said earlier, I know that Michigan just rescinded their public health emergency declaration status, so I'm not exactly sure how that's going to go. We'll see. I know that a lot of the provisions that were accepted during the public health emergency regarding telehealth more broadly are sort of here to stay in many of our states. And we'll see if verbal consent will also stick around. I'm keeping my eye out on those conversations. So I'm not exactly sure yet. If you want to follow up with me, here's my contact information. I'm the program coordinator, and if you email info@UMTRC or use our website form, it will redirect to my direct email address, and then there's my phone number as well. Oops. Some additional resources that you can find on the UMTRC website, I've listed them on the left-hand side here, including frequently asked questions, technology toolkits and assessments, our general resource tabs, as well as a link to join our newsletter for any frequent updates. And while these COVID-19 resources might seem out of date, like I've said just a few minutes ago, it looks like the genie is sort of out of the bottle at this point, and many of the provisions that were accepted in terms of relaxed rules and regulations during the pandemic will be here to stay in our region, at least to some degree. We're just trying to keep our ear to the ground in terms of policy decisions and see how that plays out. So I'm going to go ahead and pause there. It is 1:16. So that means we have 14 minutes for questions, comments, any other kind of technical assistance deals that I can do for you. Are these slides available? Yes, these slides will be available once we get the recording posted up on our YouTube channel. I suppose I wouldn't be a very good program coordinator if I didn't take this opportunity to invite everybody to the UMTRC annual conference this year, as we are being able to hold it in person. And that will be July 20th and 21st in South Bend. We will hope to see many of you there. I see Mary with the thumbs up. So hopefully we'll see you there as well. Any other questions or general technical assistance questions that may or may not be related to consent and documentation? Well, seeing none, you are free to go whenever. I will stick around here for the remainder of the half hour, just in case anybody has any questions.